the difference is very striking, because however good an orchestra is, however motivated and passionate they are, and how much they love playing together, they cannot give as much as a group as they can when there's a conductor bringing all the minds together as one. It's a fascinating thing that there's always something that a conductor can bring beyond what an orchestra can do on their own.
And this is something that you speak about as a function of leadership.
Right. So the power comes from the ability of the conductor to release the power in the orchestra. So it isn't the power of the conductor itself, because the players are playing. And the conductor's job is to release that power. And we can always do that, provided we really believe in the power that's in the orchestra. We know it's there, and our job is just to galvanize it. And we're both committed to that kind of conducting, both of us, when we always have been. That it's not about us, it's about them. And of course, it's about them so that the audience can get the maximum experience from hearing the music. So it's a process which goes from the conductor to the players, releasing the players to be the most intense and most communicative, and then the audience gets the impact. And if they feel that on their pulses, they feel the energy, they feel the excitement, they feel the music moving them to their hearts, then they are drawn to classical music the way that people are drawn to things that they really, really love. Yeah. And I call that classical fever, because if you catch it, you can pass it on to other people.
I just want to stay with that talk that you gave at E.J. Thomas Hall. It was for the University of Akron's lecture series. It was sponsored by First Energy and the First Energy Foundation. And it was in honor of Guy Pipitone, Senior Vice President, who is my host and your host.
When we go there.
Renee, both former presidents of the Akron Symphony, of the Greater Akron Musical Association. And so it was really in their honor that you gave this talk. And I remember when you speak about the conductor releasing that energy, so the conductor's power comes from releasing the energy, but in the orchestra, but in the audience too. And I remember when you performed, when you got to the Romeo and Juliet excerpt, you asked the audience to take the hand, if they were with somebody, a loved one, to take their hand, so that it was also about triggering that direct emotional connection with the music, with the audience.
Right. Well, it's an amazing thing about music, because music can do something that no other form of language can do, which is it doesn't speak through the brain, it speaks through the molecules. And if you have a memory of a loved one or a very intense experience, music can actually release that memory just by the sounds it makes, by the harmonies, by the way that tension is set up and released, or a phrase is shaped. And it's a kind of a mystery how that happens. Nobody quite understands what it is.
You used to have a theory about centics.
Yes.
What is that?
Well, it wasn't my theory, actually. It was the theory of a South African scientist who had discovered that there were certain shapes which were connected in the human psyche. And he used it actually in prisons and in other places to resolve conflict and difficulties, because music has that power. It has the power through the range of emotions it can express, from the most violent anger. If you take the opening of the Marla's Second Symphony, which was one of the great pieces we did, and there's a sound in the violin, like that. It's a kind of a roar. It's a stab. It's the most anguished sound that orchestras can make. From that to the most reverent, the most sublime experience that human beings can experience. And that journey from the darkest tragedy to that sublime place where literally the back of the neck, the hairs at the back of the neck send shivers down your spine. You can't resist it, that end of describing the resurrection.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to say, Ben, coincidentally and happily, we on our website now have a series of programs that we're streaming of past performances of the orchestra over the past 15 years or so.
Really? Yeah.
And we decided to lead, the very first one that we have streamed was your performance of the Mahler Second.
Wow.
In Akron and in Cleveland, if you recall, also.
Oh, never to be forgotten.
In Severance Hall. And that particular performance has been up for something like 41 days or 40 days, and it comes down on Monday. Oh. So if people want to hear it, they have until Monday.
Wow.
to enjoy it. It was a remarkable experience, and it might be worth just, that was your first appearance in Akron, right. And it was one that people who were performing, attending, involved, helping to present in the audience will never forget for the rest of their lives. But it had a very interesting origin story. And so just to remind you a little bit of this sequence, that I invited you to conduct in Akron, as I've conducted you to invite it as a guest with all of the orchestras of which I've been music director. And then we scheduled the Mahler Second, which is a piece that is in your bones and in your DNA, and which has been among the most important pieces to you in your life. And then you came and you asked whether there was the possibility of a repeat performance, because it's always, of course, disappointing when we go to all this preparation and we work it up and then there's one show and it's over. So could there be a second? And Renee D., our artistic administrator, took you at the time to the beautiful Performing Arts Center in Medina, right. Ohio, where we perform very often at the Performing Arts Center there. And you entered the stage and looked at it, and you said,
I suspect I said, is there anywhere else we could do it? And I said, what about Severance Hall? And Renee said, okay, we'll call them up. And so we called them up. I think we actually called them up from the car.
Probably. Right.
Yes, right there. And to find out if it was available the day after our performance in EJ. And it was available. It was a Sunday. And so we decided to take that on. That was, I believe, the first time that
I think it was the first time the orchestra had ever performed at Severance Hall. Right. And it came about also through generous support from a locally based company. You had given a talk, I think in New York, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a food company talk. And I met Mark Smucker coming out, I think, of the talk. We had a kind of embrace, because my talks are very uplifting and people end them
really
in a state, well, yes, because we sing the Beethoven Ninth and we're in possibility and everybody, and I met Mark Smucker and we were in terrific mood, as always, uplifted. And I called him up. I said, we want to take the Akron Symphony to Severance Hall. Would you make a contribution? Would you sponsor it? He said, sure, I'll be happy to. And so that was it. It was great. It was great. It was a memorable occasion. I mean, that symphony, there are two symphonies that perhaps stand head and shoulders above all the others because of their message and because right. of what they say. Right. And one of them is Mahler Second, and the other is Beethoven Ninth. Right. And that was the last thing I did in Akron. And
no. It was the second to last thing you did in Akron. The last thing was you worked with Sasha.
Yes, that's right.
You did an all-Russian.
Yes, Russian with Tchaikovsky 4. And that was cancelled because it was a snowstorm the day of the concert, and we had to cancel.
We did a very interesting thing, which is rare. We scheduled for the following season, but as the opening program of the season. So we opened this last season with that concert rescheduled.
Fabulous progress.
Which is fantastic.
Fabulous progress.
And I just want to go back for a moment to the Mahler second.
I've lost you. Do I do something here? What is this?
No,
You're good.
Just a moment. This is an okay here or something. Can I do this? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
People were so moved by that experience of doing the Mahler second and coming under your spell in the way that you have a special connection with that piece, and going to Severance Hall, which itself was a revelation in terms of the sound of the orchestra in that hall.
No wonder the Cleveland Orchestra sounds great, right?
That's one factor. That.
Yeah.
And then a wonderful musician who's a dear friend of mine and of yours and of the orchestra and a very important figure in Northeast Ohio, made a beautiful book for you as a memento of the Mahler second journey.
Yeah. Here it is.
So this was put together by Ted Schur. I don't know if you flip a few pages, we might see a little bit.
Beautiful. It says a transformational journey.
Yeah.
And you open it up. It has amazing photographs.
Ted is a wonderful conductor and musician, but he's also a fabulous photographer.
Beautiful message, incredible message. And then these many extraordinary photographs. I don't know if you can see them.
Yeah, we see them very well.
Beautiful. With the choir director and
Hugh Floyd,
the first cellist, and the photographs are just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah,
it's really like a journey.
Yeah,
and look, there we all are on the stage and Severance Hall at the end here.
Yeah, seventh. I mean, it was a transformational moment for us, for the orchestra. But it would be interesting to say a little bit about Ted, and the connection you have with Ted is principally through his extraordinary father.
Right. His father was one of the greatest musicians that America ever produced, and he's not known by, I would say, in your audience, Leonard Shirk is not a name that immediately brings recognition, but he had a profound influence on all American musicians, I think, and certainly on pianists. And I was privileged to sit in his class in New York, not as a pianist, but I was a cellist. But I sat in his class. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, to hear him play, to hear him teach. And a great teacher gets into more than your brain and your knowledge. It gets into your body language. And Leonard Shirk got into my body language. So when I opened the Sixth Symphony of Marla, boom, 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 dee-ya-dum, dee-ya, that's Leonard Shirk. That I hear that sound, I hear his body, I hear the way he played the piano, and that it's an amazing thing that teachers can do that. My own teacher, my own cello teacher, created a sound world for me that every time I conduct, that I hear that sound. I hear Casado's cello playing. I coax out of the string players the sound that he put into my body when I was 15 years old. Isn't that an amazing thing, how that works?
Well, it is amazing. It's what you do with young musicians every day and throughout your life. I remember you saying to me when I was just getting started, start a youth orchestra, work with children. Working with children is the way into the heart of music.
Right. Absolutely, I believe that. Because they're forming their sound. When you go to an established orchestra, I remember when I went to the Israel Philharmonic for the first time, I stopped in the middle of a rehearsal of Mahler 5, and it was one of those moments, I can't remember in the first movement with the big tune, and I said, I'm going to pay you the ultimate compliment. You are a world-class orchestra, and you play like a youth orchestra. And they all laughed because they understood. They understood. It was not an insult.
Yeah.
It was a great compliment because children have a power that they progressively can lose. They don't always lose it. And part of our job is to remind people what it is to be.
It's like the people who teach you to paint who say, you know, children all say, if you say, who in this classroom is a painter? Every hand goes up.
Yes, exactly.
And then they hit the age of 12 and half the hands go up.
Right. And then
you hit the age of 18 and maybe one hand goes up.
Right. That's exactly right.
Your job as a conductor is to appeal to that early manifestation of
and so what I'm doing is playing on that. One of the assignments I give every year to my youth orchestra, because I give an assignment every week to them. And the first one is recognize what a contribution you are. Be conscious of what a contribution. And the second one is throw yourself into life like a pebble into a pond and watch the ripples. That's the second. And the third assignment is come from the power of a child, because we forget the power of spontaneity, of risk-taking, of joy, of exuberance, of willingness to fail and fall down and get up. There are so many things that children have instinctively without thinking that we progressively lose as we become more self-conscious, more worried, more competitive, more anxious about winning and losing and all of that.
And more self-judging.
And more self-judging.
Where does that come from?
Fear.
Why is it? Yeah.
It all comes from fear. Everything in the sense comes from fear. So if we can get beyond that to the spontaneous love and generosity and contribution that we had when we were little, then of course it opens up the emotional pores of everybody. And with the youth orchestra, you don't have to work on that. Actually, it's there. All you have to do is turn on the tap. With an older orchestra, it's often there's some resistance there, because what happens, I believe, when we think of musicians as being cynical, and we often talk about professional musicians as being cynical, what it is a cynical person is a passionate person that doesn't want to be disappointed again. So it's a wall that's put up. I don't want to be disappointed. When I come to Akron, I do not find a cynical orchestra. I find a childlike orchestra.
Oh, we lost Chris.
Have we lost me? We've lost Christopher.
There he is.
Yeah, and that's what the joy is. And I don't think it's there by chance. I think it's there because you've reminded them constantly why they went into music. And that's the beautiful thing about you and why you're such a powerful figure in the music world. We talked a lot about me, but I think one of the things that is so amazing about what you do is you, first of all, through the repertoire that you choose, I think you're the most original creator of programming that I know of anywhere. You're constantly stretching the players to go into places where they wouldn't normally expect to go, through relationships, through connections with other parts of the art. It's a fascinating thing. And you do the same here in Boston with the Landmarks Orchestra. They're always saying how wonderful the repertoire is. So I think that when I come there, I find a fertility, an openness, an open-heartedness that is very rare. So you don't have to work on it in Akron. But that's a very precious thing, and I don't think it exists much in the world. And it's needed so deeply right now, because look where we are. We're in a terrible position, not only because of the terrible threat of the disease, but also because of the fear of the economy and the fear of the political enmity that exists in our country. And music can play a very, very important role, and we musicians can play a very important role. I remember once I gave a class, and my father, who was very old, 94 or something, listening to the class. And at the end of it, I went to see him. He was completely blind, and he began by saying, "I see," which was funny because he see. I said, I see you're actually a member of the healing profession. And I thought, I was just so moved by that idea that we musicians are actually healers and we can do something, give access. On the front of the book, The Art of Possibility, which I wrote together with my beloved partner and former wife, Rosamond, who you know very well, it says on that book, if you read it with an open heart and mind, it will improve your health. And I think it's a wonderful idea to think that we have a capacity and a need, a desire to be in the healing profession. And whenever I come into your environment, and I must say this is a deep compliment of an appreciation and love, wherever you go, you create a healing environment. And that is the most wonderful thing that can be said about anybody who sets out in music.
Well, we can say that music making is ultimately profoundly about human connection. That's where it starts, and that's what its intent is there to serve. In Akron, we have a really powerful program now working with Summa Health System and the mentally ill. So working for mental health through connection, where music is the means,
right,
the vehicle for it. And I think that, you know, the collaborations that I'm interested in, they're also about community connection. That's the main thing. I think a lot of this comes from my work with you as a young person. I began actually in your youth orchestra. I was still a teenager. And then
I remember the first day with your oboe playing so good.
Yeah. And then over time, our relationship has evolved from student to you know, performing under your direction, to actually studying conducting with you to a certain degree, to being your assistant at SUNY at Purchase, preparing orchestras for you to conduct, and then, you know, eventually this multivalent friendship that we have that extends. And
now it's in my diary. It says Christopher Wilkins' best friend. That's what it says. My assistant put it in there.
The highest compliment I've ever been paid.
Well, you know,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say, the thing we care about most is community. And both of us, we care about human relationships, inclusiveness, and contribution. Those are the things that drive us. We're not passionate about success. I always say success for me is not how much wealth and fame and power I have, but how many shining eyes there are around me. And that is a very different definition of success. And you share it and you live it. And when you do the concerts in Akron, or you do the concerts here on the Hatch Shell in Boston, what we see is the shining eyes.
Well, so Ben, I mean, it's a very interesting time to make that statement, because the one thing that is most challenging right now is for us all to connect.
Yeah.
So if you can't connect, how do you make people's eyes shine? And I wonder what thought you've given to the Boston Philharmonic, to the Boston Philharmonic Youth Orchestra, to what is available to us now in terms of doing what we love, what we know is this extraordinary vehicle for human connection. What do you think is available?
Well, it's difficult, and I think it would be foolish to be Pollyannish about it. It's a very, very serious situation for our profession and for our players, because for them to make a living now is virtually impossible. So they're dependent on government handouts and the like, which is a very serious situation, and I fear for it, and I want to do everything possible to help provide whatever is necessary. But it's going to be very difficult, because we cannot go on stage and play the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven or the Bruckner Eighth, which is what I was planning to do next year, because we can't get that number of people on stage at social distancing. So that doesn't work. So what we do at this point, we're not sure. But I tell you something, if I may tell a story, it opened up something for me that I would never have suspected. And one of the things, it's like a blank canvas. It's terrifying, but it's also very exciting.
Right.
And what happened was that the last concert in Symphony Hall in Boston was given by the youth orchestra on March 12th. And the next day, they closed the city, the hall, and basically the town. But we did give that concert, but they didn't allow us to have an audience. So we had no audience. We had actually a few parents, and I told the orchestra to act as audience and as performers. So you can't imagine, at the end of every piece, they screamed and clapped and shouted and stamped, and it sounds for all the world on the tape as if it's a full house. But anyway, what the general manager managed to do, the managing director, she managed to make an arrangement that it would be live streamed. And so it was live streamed around the world. And at one point there were 5,000 people listening to this concert. And since then it's been seen by very many more than that. But I tell you what happened, it was very interesting. One of the members of the orchestra persuaded his teachers at his high school to come to the concert, and then when the audience was cancelled, he took the trouble to call up his teachers, particularly his English teacher, and tell them to listen on live streaming, which she did. And she listened with her 10-year-old daughter. And the next day, he got a letter from her.
The player in the orchestra got a letter from his teacher.
From his teacher, saying, I watched with my daughter, who's 10, and she loved it, and she thought it was fantastic, and she was very excited, and she kept rooting for Petrushka to win the ballerina from the Moor, right? And it was Petrushka. And she, the teacher, who was, of course, thinking of it as more as an educational thing, she said to her daughter, why do you feel that? And the little girl said, well, I can see that they obviously belong together, which is hilarious. But the mother thought, well, what?
Not wrong.
Not wrong. What is it in the music that makes her feel that way? And the mother felt the same way. And so when I heard that, I settled down, because I now had an infinite amount of time. I settled down and wrote and then recorded a detailed description of Petrushka from the beginning to the end to explain how music creates a story, creates emotion, creates the feelings that we have when we listen to it. I recorded it with all the musical examples put in by my assistant in Florida, and it went online, and it's been seen now by a lot of people. And
how do people access that, Ben? It's so beautiful. I revere this little piece that it's a big piece actually, that you've like in 4 chapters.
Yeah.
And it's a child's telling the story of Petrushka, but with all the music there.
Right, all the music there. And then what the mother wrote and said, could we send it out to other teachers and parents? Because they're all with children not knowing what to do with them. So I said, of course, by all means. And so they sent it out, and I added a secret, and I'll tell the people of Akron, I haven't told anybody else. What I saw was this little girl as Christopher Robin introducing these other young children to the Petrushka doll, and like Christopher Robin introduced the Winnie the Pooh characters. And so at the end, I added the reading of Pooh Sticks, which she loved. And then I got a letter from this little girl, and she didn't want anybody else to see it until she'd seen it. And she saw it over 4 days. I said, don't rush, because it's like a Pooh story. You read one chapter. And so finally she got to the end. She wrote me a beautiful letter, which I have. I'll send it to you. You can make it available. It's absolutely gorgeous. And she said, you've changed my life, which for a 10-year-old to say is very, very nice. And so that was the first. And then I got a letter from a young woman in Australia who said, now everybody's, at a loss, and maybe I could call up Ben Zander and ask him for a conducting lesson. And so we had a 2-hour conducting lesson. And then another person called and said, could we do a public one? And so we did 274 conductors registered for it, and 11,000 people have seen that class.
And what did you do working with 274 conducters on it?
They divided into two groups. So we did one on Friday night and one on Saturday afternoon, an hour and a half. And it was just like this. I saw each conductor. I sat at the piano, played a little bit, but basically it was this. And we talked about Beethoven and how to unravel the Beethoven style physically. And it was fascinating. And then I got fantastic, about 100 of these white sheets coming back, and I've answered them all and put them in a kind of blog.
Comments.
Comment, yeah.
Ben, how can people see the conducting class?
Yeah, absolutely.
On your website?
I'm not actually sure where it is, but I'll make sure that it's going out in this blog. So maybe we can put it on your on the Akron website, and with all this.
That would be great. And the Petrushka, you're telling of the story Petrushka with the examples?
Right. Well,
Tom, can we post that as well, do you think, Tom?
Mm-hmm.
Can we put a little Ben Zander corner up on our
Yeah,
website?
we'll definitely find, will find a way.
I'll send it to you, and you do with it as it's all links to SoundCloud. Everything's there.
Yeah.
And the thing is, so why I'm telling about these stories is because none of these things could have happened if it hadn't been for the COVID-19. Because first of all, none of us have enough time. We're always so busy, and we're rushing to rehearsals and studying scores and raising money. And now suddenly everybody has time, and time that can be used in new constructive ways. And so I'm actually very excited. I'm in despair that we can't actually make the music, because the music itself is like watching a photograph. I have a fantastic tulip garden. I can show you tulip pictures, but until you go in the garden and smell the smell and feel the sun and so on, it's not live music is what we have to do. But it's amazing.
Show us the garden?
What's that?
Can you open the door and show us the garden?
The trouble is it's covered here because of the light.
Oh, yes, of course.
It's very beautiful. I mean, it's spectacularly beautiful.
It's famously beautiful.
Breathtakingly so. And if I'd had my iPad here, I could have shown it. But in any event, it's true. My father, I've told this story even in.
I'm going to ask about your father. Your father is somehow present in all the most important moments of your life.
Yes, it's true. And there were many things that inspired me in a way that nothing else could. And one of the stories was a story that's very appropriate for now, because he lost everything in the war, and his mother died in Auschwitz, and all his the elder people, 8 members of the family were killed in those camps.
He was living in Berlin.
In Berlin. And then he got out just in time with his 3 children. I was born then in England in 1939, but he came out in 1937. But anyway, he left everything behind. He lost everything that he'd built in his life, including his profession, because he was a lawyer. He couldn't practice as a lawyer in England. So he had to start again from scratch. And after a while, they interned all the German Jews, all the German people in the Isle of Man in order to protect them in case there was somebody who would cause danger. I mean, the same with the Japanese for the Americans. A foolish idea. But anyway, there were 2,000 men on the Isle of Man in a state of catatonic depression, all of them, because they were in their families were unattended to, there was no income, Hitler was in Paris. I mean, it was a catastrophic atmosphere, almost unimaginable. He said some people were so depressed that they would sit and stare at the barbed wire fence. He looked around and he saw something quite different. He said that this place is full of intelligent people. we should start a university. And they started a university in that camp, and they had 46 classes a week. There were no books, no paper, no pencil, no chalk, no blackboard, nothing. Just people talking. And that was the other side. You can always see another side. And so what's needed now, because this is a black time. I mean, it's about as black. You go on the news. I mean, it's almost unbearable. But it's no different in essence than what my father was seeing in that camp in the middle of that war. But there was always the possibility of creating a university with people speaking to each other. And what we're all doing, and you're doing it to an extraordinary degree. I don't know whether there are people in Akron aware of what you're doing for the Landmarks Orchestra here with this constant outpouring of fascinating and engaging and uplifting insights into musical experience. And we're doing it too. And all these things that couldn't have happened and wouldn't have been done because we would have been too busy. And I think if we can learn something out of this when we emerge from it, which is that being busy is not necessarily being effective or happy. It's sometimes not being busy and being forced by circumstances to think in a different way that is creating all sorts of new connections. Now I suddenly have 274 conductors with whom I'm in constant communication, with whom I had no, it was so sweet. Yesterday, I noticed that one of them had on his white sheet, I was answering all the comments, and one of them had his phone number. And I called him up because I said, do you want your phone number to be on the list or do you want it to be removed? He couldn't believe that I'd called him up. And then he wrote to everybody and his friends, all his band students, and shared that I'd called him up. And now they're all watching my interpretation classes because I have a whole series of interpretation classes on the internet.
Best thing on the internet.
Well,
there's nothing ever been created like your interpretation class. And it's so important that the record of your series of classes, there must be scores of them up there.
60, I think, 6 or more. Yeah.
Right.
But what's interesting about it is that people all around the world, I mean, one of them has been seen by 600,000 people. I mean, it's just unbelievable that people are hungry for information, but they don't want information delivered in a dry, academic way. They want to understand the pulses of life. They want to understand. Let me give you a little example, Chris, because it's something that we both know very well. There's huge argument about Beethoven and his tempi, right? And one of the most crucial...
I thought you'd settled all those.
Yeah, well, I feel I have. But let me give you an example. The Scherzo of the Ninth Symphony. Nobody argues about that. Everybody does it more or less at that tempo. 116, everybody agrees, no problem. Now comes the trio. The trio is preposterously fast. It's so fast that many musicians say it's unplayable. Well, it isn't actually unplayable. One of my kids in the youth orchestra, oboist, can play that passage that everybody finds so impossibly difficult. He has no problem with it. But in any event, everybody agrees that it's so fast that it probably shouldn't be because, you know, Beethoven didn't know and he was deaf and his metronome was broken and all that nonsense. Well, let me tell you what it is. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's 116 with three beats. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Then there's an accelerando, and when you get to the trio, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the same tempo. It's not that complicated. It's simply 4 notes in the time of 3. What's the problem? Well, the answer is that if you think of it as something slow which is speeded up, it sounds awful. But if you think of it as something flying through the light, it's easy. That doesn't sound impossible at all. It sounds great. It sounds exuberant. It sounds gorgeous. And he repeats it over and over again. And he certainly wouldn't do that if it were slow. So all you have to do is to understand something like that, and immediately you say, of course, now I understand. And when you understand it, you feel it. And when you feel it, your life is changed.
Sounds simple.
Yeah, it is actually quite simple.
So we have time here for a few questions that people have sent in, if that's okay.
Yeah.
We kind of touched on this a little bit, but Ben, this is a question for both of you. Ben's first guest appearance with us was in 2008. He came back last September. How have you seen the orchestra evolve over that time period from a musician standpoint?
Great. Well, this is the most amazing thing, not just about Akron, but about America. And that is this. The music schools in America are the best music schools in the world, and they have produced a whole generation of extraordinary instrumentalists on a level way beyond what was there before. And they have infused all these orchestras that are not the Cleveland or Philadelphia or Boston or New York, and brought the level up to a much higher degree. And I've watched that in the time that I've been coming since 2008. And also you have a very discerning music director. So whenever there's an opening in the orchestra, they go through a very thorough process. They have a huge range of people to choose from. And so the level goes up and up and up. I mean, the first trumpet who was playing in the Tchaikovsky Sixth Symphony, in the Fourth Symphony and the last concert. I mean, my eyebrows went right to the top of my head when I heard him. I mean, that's a huge leap.
It's true really throughout the whole musical fabric of America.
Exactly.
I played in your youth orchestra the first year it existed.
Right.
And it was a fine little chamber orchestra. But throughout the United States, the level of playing in the youth orchestras, first of all, there are more accomplished musicians, and the average level of them is vastly higher than when I was a kid. So when people say, oh, classical music, it's dying, and it's not going to find a future, the first thing I say is, look at the youth orchestras, look at the schools, look at who wants to do this and who is willing to put in the hard work to achieve what it takes now to get into professional orchestra. In that respect, our industry is better off than it's ever been.
I absolutely.
And I don't think there's any way to argue with that.
And it isn't only technical, it's also musical training. The level of understanding amongst musicians today is spectacularly high. So when I put out white sheets in front of the orchestra, I would put them on the stand. I do
People
that.
don't know what white sheets are, Ben.
White sheets. I mean, doesn't everybody in the world now know what it is?
Yes, they sleep in them.
White sheets it's a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper that I put on the stand of every musician in every orchestra that I conduct. And it's an invitation. It doesn't have any agenda. It's simply saying, if you have something to say, please say it. And please, only one condition, you have to sign it. Otherwise, I won't accept it. You can't speak on behalf of the whole orchestra or say people are saying. No, it's not a union thing. I mean, it's not a group of people speaking. It's one individual speaking. And I take those very seriously, because and it doesn't matter where they're sitting. If they're sitting in the back of the second violins or the double bass section, it doesn't matter where they are experiencing something. And it's often a question, it's often a comment, it's a coaching, it's an observation, sometimes brilliant things that give me a kind of little shift so that I learn something. Or if somebody wants to do something, I remember somebody in your orchestra wrote, could I have a little bit more time at the top of the phrase? Because I could just that extra, and of course, that I would be delighted. And somebody else wrote, I love that chord. And then they identified a chord in the piece. And every time that chord came, I would look at the person and say, that's our chord. So it creates a wonderful relationship. But the level of sophistication and intelligence and broad knowledge is vastly greater than it was. And it grows all the time. And so watching an orchestra like the Akron Symphony, and more sophisticated, and as they get more educated and more knowledgeable, and that's part of your job, is to make sure that they get the information behind. I mean, the pre-concert talks and all the stuff that we do now to educate the audience and therefore also the players is part of the process. And as they get more informed and more engaged intellectually, they enjoy it more, and then their eyes shine more because they realize what's happening, or you point something out to them and they, wow, for instance, in the Fifth Symphony, the fact that that's a melody, and the fact that it's in different instruments makes them relate to the other instrument in a totally different way. So I find that the whole discourse in the music world is richer than it has ever been. And each time I come to your beautiful city, and I say beautiful city not because I'm complimenting it like they always say, the great state of Ohio, the great state of California. The beauty of Akron for me is the size, because it's small enough so that people, when I go to one of these events, like your president of your board had a party.
Mike Pasternak had a beautiful party, reception for you. Yes.
Beautiful party. And you had a feeling that everybody in the community who was a leader, somebody who felt responsible for the community and for the well-being of the people, everybody was there, and it was just one room. And I love that sense of a community being containable, relatable. And that's beautiful, and large enough so that there's a lot of interest. And another great event, which will always remain in my mind, was the event which you did for the LeBron James School.
Yes.
And
LeBron's I Promise School.
Right. And, you know, I'd heard the name. It didn't mean anything to me. But when you were on stage...
One of the few Americans for whom it didn't mean anything. But please, I digress.
I tell you what it didn't mean until, I mean, it meant something. But I tell you what it meant is when they recited the promise, I cried. I had tears in my eyes because there were more people on stage, I think, than there were, well, not vastly. It wasn't a vast crowd. It was 100 people on the group, the class that came.
Fourth graders, yeah.
Fourth grade. But they all stood up and spoke this promise. And I thought, good Lord, and they've got a full symphony orchestra to play for them. I said, whatever LeBron James is doing in his life, I mean, that's something. That's something. I mean, that's a life worth living. So there are all sorts of things that I find there, and the Pipitones, I mean, the life they lead and the connection with the community. I mean, it's a poem. It's a poem. It's really beautiful, and you're a great part of it. And the music director should be at the center of a community. Should be I mean, it used to be the priest, and now it's the music director.
So I think we have time for one last question here. So if I'm looking for music to inspire me, give me one or two recommendations. What would you recommend? I know what I kind of listen to.
Tom,
Mm-hmm.
One of the beauties of classical music is that it has so many levels and layers to it. We keep coming back to these great works, some of which Ben has mentioned, and we come back to them because there's a new discovery every time we come back. So it helps to have a brilliant tour guide. There's a lot to notice. It's like going to a museum and you look at a painting and you appreciate it. But with a great tour guide, it opens up. It's like opening a window. You see into it, you see things you hadn't noticed. That enhances your pleasure, your love of that piece. There's nothing like it. So I would say the first thing people who ask that question, what music, how can I get inspired? How can I fall in love with this tradition? The very best thing you can do is to choose Benjamin Zander as your tour guide. So if you go to benjaminzander.org, and I would say the best thing on the internet are the interpretation classes. They're called, I believe, Interpretations of Music, Lessons for Life.
Right, Interpretation of Music and Lessons for Life. And the place to get them actually, because the website is about to explode in July when it's all built. But right now it's on YouTube. You just put in Zander Interpretation and you go there. And I would start with Elgar's Cello Concerto.
Right.
First movement, Elgar Cello Concerto is a wonderful young musician who plays, you think when you listen to him, that it must be the best performance ever. And then we go into a discussion about it. And I say, I think 600,000 people have found that place to discover something about music, something about themselves, something about the way the music can touch us, something about how we can transform very, very good playing into great playing by focusing on certain aspects. So lessons in life, so that some of the things we've been talking about today, that we care so much about. I mean, you're a great educator, and it starts with your family and the two beautiful children you have, one of which I don't know if Akron, the whole of Akron knows, is a world champion skateboard, what do you call it, skateboard champion. But you have a gorgeous daughter who's a budding doctor, and everywhere you go, and I have deep admiration for your ability as an educator, and that's where we come. Teaching is a sacred task, and we both feel that way about it. And the word maestro, it doesn't mean a grand person to be looked up to. A maestro is a teacher. That's what it means, just a teacher. And it's a sacred task. So if you draw people to those interpretation classes, and I would recommend, there's also wonderful on the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, but you can go about, and if you're on YouTube, you'll see on the right-hand side, the next one comes up, the next one. And the website is also great. But thank you for saying that, because it's my best way of sharing my passion for music and what I've discovered there.
And thank you so much for visiting with our Akron family and patrons. And
yeah, it's a
period. It's been a beautiful hour, and I think a really insightful and helpful hour for those of us who are wondering, how can we engage with, how can we support the Akron Symphony? You know, what is the significance of this art form, because we want it to continue. And
let me just say a word about that. This fundraising thing, you know, we have to fundraise, but actually it isn't fundraising. It's about sharing the beauty so that people are drawn to it, like bees to the flower. And the bees then contribute what they have to offer to the flower. And that's the way it works. It's not about, please, you know, holding up a hat and saying, please put some money, because they're really, rather give it to the poor people who are standing in line trying to get some food. But that's not what this is. This is a love relationship between people who have immense power to give and to receive. And the way of expressing that is by contributing towards it, just the way the bees contribute to the flowers, or is it the other way around? I never know which it is. So
speaking of which, I want to thank Amanda, your technical assistant, without whom we never would have figured out how to do this.
No.
And Tom, thank you for the idea of making this happen. I think it's a wonderful thing, and for your generous way in which you manage our marketing efforts with the Akron Symphony.
Beautiful. And for having the idea of doing this. I mean, this is, to me, it just makes so much, it's so organic, because we've been together, I don't know how many years, it's 40 years or some incredible amount, and it's a beautiful thing. And you notice I'm wearing my Martha's Vineyard t-shirt.
I did notice.
You can see it, because we spent our holidays together on Martha's Vineyard.
I thought that was maybe in honor of our friendship.
Yes, absolutely. Some of the best times of my life have been spent with you, I tell you. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining us. Thank you for everyone who's watching. We will be back again sometime sometime soon. We're going to have another guest. We're working on lining up some more special guests. And thank you both. Be safe, and we will talk soon.
Great. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.